What's up guys, Jared here. As you all know, we spend a fair amount of time here at Wisecrack waxing poetic about a lot of great cinema and TV. But we also love stuff that some would consider not great, like this.
Garbage day! Huh? No!
Or this. And of course we wanted to know, why is this so good? Is it for the same reason we can't look away from a train wreck? But by the time we were done researching, we stumbled upon some writers that made a pretty convincing argument that bad films can actually be more profound than good films. How? Well, let's find out in this Wisecrack vlog on bad movies. First, what makes a certain form of bad film so compelling that you'll go to the theater to see it every month at midnight instead of watching an Academy Award-winning film like Roma as you're supposed to? Film scholar Jeffrey Sconce dubbed cinema's sleazy underbelly paracinema, a term meant to encompass all films that fall outside of the mainstream, from fake blood-happy splatter films to Troll 2.
They're eating her! And then they're going to eat me! Oh my God!
Sconce says that the explicit manifesto of paracinematic culture is to valorize all forms of cinematic trash. That is, cinema that's been rejected or ignored by those who know better than you. If you've ever called a film so bad it's good, well congrats, you might just be a budding connoisseur of what Sconce calls the bad film. It's one word: bad film. In appreciating bad film, fans turn the bad into the sublime. Pretty dope. Now let's narrow down what exactly a bad film is. There's actually some consistency across this genre besides you just know it when you see it. Is it money? Not quite. A low budget does not necessarily a bad film make, just like a high budget doesn't mean your film is going to rock. For example, the genuinely good 1999 film Blair Witch was made for $60,000, approximately 1/100th of the Room's inexplicably large $6 million budget. Film scholar Rebecca Bartlett waded through the cesspool of cinematic history and found that these flicks frequently display issues regarding post-production sound.
Here they come!
The excessive use of recycled footage, unconvincing acting.
Well, you know, Ben, if I ever get killed, maybe you can take that insurance money and just go ahead and buy 100 bikes. Oh.
And incoherent editing styles, while other researchers point to shoddy cinematography, bad direction, and lack of continuity. Take this moment from The Room, famous for just how totally off it feels.
I did not hit her. It's not true. It's bullshit. I did not hit her. I did not. Oh, hi, Mark.
A good actor might keep his tone of voice consistent, rather than cheerfully saying,
oh, hi, Mark.
While a good editor might cut to a shot of Mark before Wiseau addresses him, so that the audience isn't so freaking confused. For bad films like The Room, the incompetence we love is the disingenuity, the nope, we don't buy it gut reaction that it elicits. Bad films also in existing outside the realm of major studios tend to be more unfiltered, often expressive of a single person's individual vision and quirky originality. As a result, bad films are full of stylistic oddities and excessive failed attempts at tragedy or comedy or shark-induced violence. The same way a film scholar waxes poetic about Godard's camera motions, a bad film fan will delight in the corny character reactions or melodramatic transitions in Sharknado. So how is it that these films can actually be smart? Because they exist on the fringes of culture, bad films are sometimes incredibly subversive in ways that traditional films can't be. Our love of them isn't some newfound hipster ironicism either. Rabid film lovers have long harbored weird obsessions with these bizarro films trapped in the basement of cinematic culture. Take famous bad film director Ed Wood's most bewildering flick, Glenn or Glenda, which was both a remarkably progressive take on trans issues and a remarkably bad film. Some of the earliest scholarly declarations of love for bad cinema came in tandem with the cultural and cinematic revolutions of the late 60s, like in 1968 when critic Pauline Kael declared the hippie exploitation film Wild in the Streets to be superior to Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey.
You see, ever since the accident, I've I've been under the care of an LSD therapist.
Now, 2001 inarguably changed cinema forever. Wild in the Streets, on the other hand, was a psychedelic satire about a teenage hippie who becomes president, poisons DC's water supply with acid, and forcibly moves every American over the age of 35 to concentration camps, where they are forced to drop acid on the reg. And it's somehow 100% more bananas than it sounds. Cale defended her provocative opinion by arguing that the entire purpose of cinema as an art has never been to copy the pretensions of European high culture, but instead to embrace the childish, the fun. She points out that the earliest films took their cues not from James Joyce, but from The Peep Show, The Wild West Show, The Music Hall, The Comic Strip, from that which was coarse and common. Thus, Cale argues that high art, quote, sophisticated films are less authentic than outsider art seen in shitty movies like Wild in the Streets, and indeed, The Room. Paracinematic movies like Wild in the Streets, Cale says, are also far more interesting because they had, in some rudimentary way, some freshness, some hint of style, some trace of beauty, some audacity, some craziness. While 2001 takes itself seriously, Cale says films like Wild in the Streets have the joy of playfulness. In explicitly good, artful films like 2001, we go to the movies and silently, reverently consume the film and then say wow when we leave. In contrast, Wild in the Streets is blatantly not a masterpiece of American filmmaking, but you will have a fun, irreverent time watching it, and there's value in that. In being completely bizarro, Cale contended, Wild in the Streets can actually tell us a lot about its moment in time, in which youth rebellion was seen as the biggest threat to the status quo, and the boogeyman of hallucinogens loomed large. No tasteful scene could have expressed those anxieties, quite like the tacky absurdity of old people screaming as their doses of acid kicked in. Not even this. But what's actually going on when you watch a bad film? A lot, actually. Recognizing a movie like The Room for what it is, so bad that it's mega good, actually requires some pretty sophisticated thinking.
You are lying. I never hit you. You are tearing me apart, Lisa!
That's because deciphering a bad film mandates extra textual analysis, which means you're not merely deciding if you like the film's storyline or camera angles or relate to the film's characters. Instead, you're addressing the creator's intentions, judging if those intentions were met, and lolling at all the ways in which they weren't. Take this early love scene in The Room. Why do they keep hitting each other with pillows? Why is Wiseau ripping rose petals? Extra textual analysis tells us that he was trying to mimic the romantic spirit of smoochy love sequences, trying to make the scene both sexual and sensual. Maybe even was inspired by your other favorite creepy rose petal scene. This process of reading the film necessarily calls attention to the text as a cultural and sociological document, which allows for even more interesting analysis. Okay, so what's the value of The Room as a cultural artifact? According to filmmaker and professor Ross Morin, through the complete excess in every area of production, The Room reveals to us just how empty, preposterous, and silly the films and television programs we've watched over the past couple of decades have been. In attempting to mimic Hollywood and failing, Wiseau's film actually reveals the ridiculousness of the tropes that have saturated much of mainstream commercial filmmaking. While bad film originated amongst film nerds, we'd argue that the growing sophistication of audiences makes bad film more relevant to the masses than ever. As the line between audience and art maker continues to disintegrate, we're increasingly primed to engage in the sophisticated analysis that is the appreciation of bad filmmaking. Today, the cult of bad film has increasingly moved online. Indeed, just like grad students snickering wryly as they watch the Garbage Pail Kids movies on VHS in 1987, we're all sharing and disseminating what can only be called internet paracinema. You can see this in everything from the overly earnest pleas of Leave Britney Alone, to the addictingly bad tunes of Rebecca Black, to any one of those wedding aisle dance videos. These specimens are on the face bad films, often shooting for a goal that's way beyond their reach. And yet, they are often strangely compelling precisely because of their oddities, eccentricities, or spectacular failures. Like Morin's analysis of The Room, one could argue that things like Rebecca Black inadvertently reveal important truths. In this case, economic inequality, or put more bluntly, the utter decadence of growing up the daughter of parents who have way more money than brains. At the end of the day, there are plenty of arguments as to why we should discount good taste in cinema, and why this video of a corgi riding a pony is A, truer to cinema's roots, B, more fun, and C, more reflective of our culture than the Academy Award-winning film The English Patient. But what do you think, Wisecrack tastemakers? Is there a higher truth in art that's so bad it's good? And is The Room a fascinating cultural artifact, or a goofy-ass fluke?